The Boston rain was a cold, relentless misery, turning the city's brick sidewalks into slick, treacherous paths. For Sloane Kelly, it was the perfect, miserable end to a miserable 12-hour shift. Every bone in her body ached, a dull throb that harmonized with the low hum of the neon sign from the Blue Note, the jazz bar where she poured drinks and wiped away the troubles of strangers. Stepping out from the relative warmth of the bar's alleyway, she pulled her thin coat tighter. The damp chill seeped in instantly. Across the street, half hidden in the shadows of a brownstone, 2 figures stood under an awning. Their silhouettes were bulky and unmistakable. O'Connell's men. They weren't looking at her, not yet, but their presence was a constant, suffocating weight on her chest. The debt her father had left behind was a ghost that haunted her every step. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Chloe. "Here, black SUV, corner of Newbury. Hurry, it's pouring." Relief washed over her. With a last, fearful glance at the figures across the street, Sloane pulled up her hood and ran, her worn-out sneakers splashing through puddles. She saw it just as Chloe described. A large, gleaming black SUV parked at the corner, its engine humming quietly. The rear passenger door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation out of the storm. Without a second thought, she pulled it open and scrambled inside, slamming it shut behind her. "Thank God," she breathed, shaking the rain from her fiery red hair. "I thought I was going to have to swim home. Those—" She stopped. The words died in her throat. This wasn't Chloe's car. There was no scent of Chloe's cheap vanilla air freshener. Instead, the air was thick with the rich smell of Italian leather, expensive cologne, and something else. Something cold and metallic, like steel. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Slowly, she lifted her head. In the spacious seat opposite her sat a man. He was a figure carved from shadow and stillness, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed to absorb the dim city light filtering through the tinted windows. His face was sharp, all hard angles and aristocratic lines, with a jaw that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of dark coffee, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving, predatory intensity. This was Dante Moretti. In the front passenger seat, another man older, with a nervous sweat on his brow, was frozen mid-sentence, his hand clutching a manila envelope. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. She had not just entered the wrong car, she had stumbled into a different world. The tension inside the vehicle was a living thing, coiling and tightening with every second of her intrusion. The nervous man in the front finally broke the silence, his voice a panicked whisper. "Moretti, who the hell is this?" Dante didn't look away from Sloane. His expression didn't change, yet a palpable wave of menace rolled off him. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. It was directed at the man in the front seat. "Get out." The order was flat, absolute. The nervous man flinched as if struck. He threw a terrified look at Sloane, shoved the envelope onto the console, and practically fell out of the car, disappearing into the rainy night. Now, it was just the two of them. Sloane was trapped. The automatic locks had clicked shut. The humming engine was the only sound. She felt pinned by his gaze, like a butterfly under glass. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I thought this was my friend's car. It was a mistake." Dante Moretti remained perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He studied her for a long, agonizing moment, his dark eyes seeming to strip away every layer of her being, seeing her fear, her exhaustion, and the desperation that had led her to his door. The silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Then, his voice, low and dangerously calm, filled the space between them. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a guillotine's blade. "Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Sloane, trembling, could only shake her head. Words failed her as Dante Moretti's cold gaze analyzed her, searching for lies, for deceit. "My name is Sloane Kelly," she managed, her voice thin. "I work at the Blue Note. I swear I thought this was my friend's car. It was just a mistake." Dante remained silent, his expression unreadable. He lifted a hand, not towards her, but towards the intercom. "Luca," he said, his voice a low command. "The girl, Sloane Kelly. Find out everything." The disembodied voice of the driver replied instantly. "Yes, boss." For several agonizing minutes, the only sound was the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the quiet hum of the engine. Sloane sat rigidly, daring not to move, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. She could hear the faint, rapid clicking of keys as Luca presumably ran her name through whatever dark databases men like Dante had access to. "She's clean," Luca's voice finally came through the speaker. "Bartender, lives in South Boston. Mother's got medical bills. Her father. He had a significant debt with the O'Connells before he disappeared." The mention of the O'Connells made something click behind Dante's eyes. His gaze sharpened on Sloane, not with suspicion now, but with cold calculation. The O'Connell crew his most bitter and unpredictable rivals. "The men you were running from tonight," Dante stated. Not a question. "They were O'Connell's." Sloane flinched, nodding numbly. "They saw you get into my car," he continued, the pieces locking into place for him. "In their world, there are no coincidences. They will not believe this was a mistake. They will believe you are with me. My associate. My lover. My leverage." A new kind of fear, colder and more profound, washed over Sloane. Before she could process his words, she felt a subtle shift in the car's momentum. It moved faster, weaving through the late-night Boston traffic with an unnerving precision. "We have company," Luca announced calmly through the intercom. "A gray sedan. Been with us for 5 blocks." Sloane's head whipped around to look through the rear window. Through the rain-streaked glass she saw it, a pair of headlights, following too closely, too consistently, the O'Connells. Her mistake hadn't just put her in danger, it had brought the danger right to Dante's door. What followed wasn't a reckless, screeching car chase, but something far more terrifying. It was a silent, strategic dance of predators through the city's wet streets. Dante's driver moved with fluid grace, taking unexpected turns through the narrow streets of the North End, the car's powerful engine a low growl. There were no sirens, no chaos, just the chilling certainty that they were being hunted. Finally, with a sharp turn, they plunged into the darkness of an underground entrance. A heavy steel gate slammed shut behind them, cutting off the city and their pursuers. The sudden silence was deafening. They were in a pristine, brightly lit private garage. Dante didn't say a word. He simply got out of the car, his movements economical and precise. He looked at Sloane, a silent command for her to follow. Her legs felt like lead, but she obeyed, stepping out into the sterile concrete environment. He led her to a private elevator, which ascended with a silent, swift rush. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that stole her breath. It was a vast open space of glass, steel, and white marble. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire living area, revealing a stunning, panoramic view of the Boston skyline glittering like a carpet of scattered diamonds. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and looked completely untouched. It was magnificent, but it had the soul of a museum, beautiful, impressive, and utterly cold. Sloane stood in the center of the room, dwarfed by the scale of it all, her damp, worn coat feeling like a beggar's rag in a king's palace. Dante walked to the window, his back to her as he looked out over his city. "The O'Connells now believe you are my property," he said, his voice calm and final. "If I let you go, they will take you. To hurt you, to get information from you, or simply to send me a message." He turned to face her, his expression resolute. "That is a complication I will not allow. So, this is the arrangement. Your father's debt to the O'Connells is no longer your concern. I will handle it. Your mother will be protected. In return, you will stay here. You will not leave this apartment. You will not contact anyone. My men will provide you with anything you need, and they will watch you at all times." Sloane stared at him, horrified. "You can't do this. This is kidnapping." "No," Dante corrected her, his voice devoid of any emotion. "This is not a prison. This is a sanctuary. The most secure one in Boston." He gestured to the breathtaking view. "This is your gilded cage, Miss Kelly, until I decide it is safe for you to leave it." He left her standing there, alone in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. She was surrounded by unimaginable luxury, looking down on a city she could no longer touch. She had escaped the rain, but she had fallen into the heart of the storm. Sloane woke to unfamiliar silence and the feel of sheets softer than anything she had ever touched. For a disorienting second, she thought the previous night was a nightmare, but then she opened her eyes. She was in a vast, minimalist bedroom, where a gray morning light filtered through a floor-to-ceiling window, revealing the same stunning, sterile view of the Boston skyline. The reality of her situation crashed down with the force of a physical blow. She was a prisoner. Panic propelled her out of bed. The bedroom door was unlocked, and she stepped into the silent, cavernous living room of the penthouse. She raced to the main entrance, her heart pounding. The heavy door didn't have a traditional lock, only a sleek, digital keypad that stared back at her blankly. Locked. She checked her jeans from last night. Her phone was gone. "Looking for this?" The voice, calm and deep, made her spin around. Dante Moretti stood by the kitchen island, a cup of espresso in his hand. He was dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, looking as if he were about to command a boardroom, not hold a woman captive in his home. Her phone was on the marble countertop beside him. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "You can't just lock me in here. I have a job. I have a mother who will be worried sick if I don't call her." Dante took a slow sip of his espresso, his eyes never leaving hers. "Everything has been taken care of," he said, his tone infuriatingly level. "Your employer believes you've had a family emergency and needed to leave town indefinitely. Your rent has been paid for the next 3 months. As for your mother," he slid her phone across the counter towards her. "You will call her. You will tell her you have an unexpected, wonderful opportunity to house sit for a wealthy client out of state. You will tell her you are safe and happy. You will not mention me, this place, or anything about the last 12 hours. I will be listening to every word, any deviation from the script, and you lose this privilege. Sloane stared at him, aghast. The sheer arrogance, the meticulous control he had exerted over her life in just a few short hours, was terrifying. This is my life you're talking about, she shot back, her voice rising. You don't get to just write a new script for it. Your life became my concern when you stepped into my car, he countered. Setting his cup down with a soft click, he walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. He was taller than she'd realized, and his presence was immense, commanding the very air around him. So now you will live by my rules. Rule number 1, you do not try to leave. Rule number 2, you do not try to contact the outside world. Rule number 3, and the most important, you stay out of my way. This is my home and my business. You are a temporary complication. Be an invisible one. The coldness of his words stung more than any threat. To him, she wasn't even a person, just a problem to be managed. That spark of defiance she always carried refused to be extinguished. My apologies, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I didn't realize my kidnapping came with an instruction manual. Is there a welcome basket, or do I just go straight to being an invisible complication? For the first time, a flicker of something surprise, annoyance, and crossed his features. He was not used to being spoken to this way. Before he could respond, an older woman with a stern face and hair pulled back in a severe bun entered the room. Sophia will bring you whatever you need, Dante said, his tone once again flat and dismissive. Food, clothes, art supplies if you wish. She is also here to ensure you follow the rules. He turned to leave for the day. And what about you, Dante? Sloane called after him, unable to stop herself. What are your rules? Or do you just make them up as you go? He paused at the elevator door, turning his head slightly. My rule, he said, his voice a low warning, is to eliminate threats to my family and my operations. Do not become one, Miss Kelly. The elevator doors slid silently shut, leaving her alone with Sophia, whose watchful eyes were as unyielding as her employer's. An hour later, Sloane sat on the edge of the plush sofa, her phone in her hand, making the most difficult call of her life. With Dante's guard, Luca, standing impassively in the corner and Sophia busy in the kitchen, she lied to her mother, her voice bright and cheerful, painting a picture of a wonderful, fictional life, while her real one had become a cage. After she hung up, she stared at her reflection in the dark screen. The phone was just another bar in her prison. She was safe, she was provided for, and she was utterly, completely trapped. But as she looked at her own frightened eyes in the reflection, a quiet vow took root in her heart. He could cage her body, but he would not break her spirit. The first week in the gilded cage was a lesson in silent torment. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun over the Boston skyline. Sloane existed in a state of suspended animation. She ate the exquisite meals prepared by the silent, ever-watchful Sophia. She paced the length of the vast apartment until she had memorized every sterile, perfect detail. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows for hours, watching the tiny, free people on the streets below, a lump of despair lodged in her throat. The luxury that surrounded her felt like a mockery. The designer clothes that appeared in her closet were costumes. The gourmet food tasted like ash. She was a ghost haunting a beautiful, empty mausoleum, and her defiant spirit was beginning to fray. She needed an escape. Then she remembered Dante's dismissive words, art supplies if you wish. It was a lifeline. In a formal, almost defiant tone, she made her request to Sophia, sketchbooks, charcoal pencils, and a set of graphite sticks. Sophia gave a curt nod, and to Sloane's surprise, a box of high-quality art supplies was delivered the next day. At first, the art was purely a release. Her fingers, stained gray with charcoal, moved with a desperate energy. She drew the cityscape, capturing the indifferent beauty of the architecture. She drew the way the light hit a marble countertop. She was drawing to forget, to keep her mind from splintering. But as the days wore on, her art became something more. It became her voice in the suffocating silence. It became her rebellion. Her sketches took on a sharp, satirical edge. She drew the plush sofa with bars subtly integrated into its design. She sketched a bird perched on the balcony railing, with the city reflected in its eye, a tiny prisoner just like her. She drew Sophia, not as a woman, but as a stone gargoyle, eternally watchful and unmoving. Her boldest act of defiance was a portrait of Dante himself. Late one evening, working from the memory of their few tense encounters, she let her frustration and fear guide her hand. She didn't draw the handsome, powerful tycoon. She drew the wraith. She used sharp, aggressive strokes to carve out his features, emphasizing the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. She surrounded him with deep, oppressive shadows that seemed to emanate from him, a man who was not just in the darkness, but was the darkness. She left the sketchbook open on the large coffee table in the living room, a silent scream laid bare on paper. Dante returned to the penthouse well after midnight. The apartment was dark, save for the ambient glow of the city lights. He moved with a weary silence, loosening his tie as he walked into the living room. His eyes fell on the open sketchbook. He stopped. Picking it up, he slowly flipped through the pages under the dim light of a single lamp. He saw his perfect home depicted as a prison. He saw his loyal housekeeper as a statue. And then, he saw himself. He stared at the portrait for a long time, his expression unreadable. Another man might have felt anger or insult, but Dante was a strategist who valued perception above all else. He was used to fear, false flattery, and greed from those around him. He had never encountered this, raw, brutal honesty. She hadn't captured his face, she had captured his essence. This girl, this invisible complication, saw him with a clarity that was both unnerving and compelling. For the first time, he felt a flicker of respect. The next morning, he found her by the window, sketching the early morning haze over the harbor. She tensed when she saw him, expecting a confrontation. He walked over, glancing down at her current drawing. "You have a talent," he stated simply. The words, coming from him, held a surprising weight. Sloane's eyes remained on her paper, her hand still. "It passes the time." Dante looked from her drawing to the city outside. "You see things as they are." He didn't mention the portrait. He didn't have to. The unspoken acknowledgement hung in the air between them, a strange, new current in the atmosphere of the gilded cage. He turned and left for the day without another word. Sloane slowly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had thrown her defiance at him like a stone, expecting it to be thrown back. Instead, he had caught it, examined it, and, in his own way, acknowledged it. Her act of rebellion had not created a wider rift between them. It had built a strange and unsettling bridge. She looked down at her charcoal-stained fingers, more uncertain than ever about the man who held her captive. A subtle shift had settled over the penthouse in the days following the sketchbook incident. The silence was still present, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a strange, unspoken awareness. Dante started spending more time working from his home office, a formidable presence at the other end of the vast apartment. They moved in separate orbits, but for the first time, Sloane felt less like an object he was storing and more like a person he was observing. One night, unable to sleep, Sloane was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when the elevator chimed, announcing Dante's return. It was much later than usual. He stepped into the foyer, and even in the dim light, she could tell something was wrong. He moved with a forced, rigid control, his usual fluid grace gone. His face was a pale, tight mask of exhaustion. As he shrugged off his tailored suit jacket, a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain escaped his lips. He quickly stifled it, but not before Sloane saw him press a hand to his side, his fingers coming away dark. Her blood ran cold. The brutal reality of his world, a world of violence she had only imagined, was standing right in front of her, bleeding on the marble floor. Her first instinct was to flee, to lock herself in her room and pretend she had seen nothing. This was his life. It had nothing to do with her. But she didn't move. She watched as he leaned heavily against the wall, his head bowed, his breathing shallow and ragged. In that moment, he wasn't the Wraith, the untouchable crime lord of Boston. He was just a man, hurt and trying to hide it. The part of her that instinctively cared, the part that soothed her mother's fevers and held her brother's hand, warred with her fear. Compassion won. "You're hurt," she said softly, her voice startling in the silence. His head snapped up, his eyes instantly cold and hard, a shield slamming into place. "It's nothing. Go to bed." He started to walk towards his office, but his stride was unsteady. She could see the dark stain on his crisp white shirt spreading. "It's not nothing. You're bleeding through your shirt," she insisted, stepping forward. She pointed to a chair. "Sit down. Let me help you." Dante stared at her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. No one gave him orders, but the pain was a persistent, grinding reality, and there was a surprising firmness in her voice. After a tense moment that stretched for an eternity, he gave a stiff, reluctant nod and sank into the chair. With trembling hands, Sloane retrieved the first aid kit she had seen Sophia store in a bathroom cabinet. Kneeling before him, she gently unbuttoned his shirt. The wound was a deep, raw graze along his ribs, angry and bleeding sluggishly. A bullet, she realized with a sickening lurch. But as the fabric parted, her eyes were drawn to something else. His skin was a roadmap of past violence. Faint, silvery lines of old knife wounds, and then a puckered, brutal scar just over his heart, a permanent indentation in the smooth muscle. It was ugly and violent, a testament to a moment that had nearly ended his life. The air grew thick with a strange intimacy. The only sounds were her soft breathing and the clinking of medical supplies. Her touch was gentle as she cleaned the new wound, a stark contrast to the violence that had inflicted it. For Dante, this quiet, tender care was a foreign concept. He was used to doctors in sterile rooms or patching himself up alone. He watched her, his defenses momentarily lowered by pain and surprise, seeing not a captive, but a woman of quiet strength. "The old one," she whispered, her fingers hovering near the scar over his heart. "What happened?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, lost in a memory she couldn't see. "A reminder," he finally said, his voice rough. "That betrayal often comes from the hand you're expecting to shake." It was the first piece of his past he had ever offered her, a shard of vulnerability from a man made of iron. She finished bandaging his side, her movements efficient and sure. When she was done, she looked up and met his eyes. The usual coldness was gone, replaced by something deeper, more complex. An unguarded assessment. "Thank you," he said. The two words sounded unnatural, as if he rarely had cause to use them. He stood, his movements still stiff, and retreated to his wing of the penthouse without another word. Sloane remained kneeling on the floor for a long moment, the scent of antiseptic and his cologne clinging to the air. She had seen the scar beneath the suit, the man beneath the monster. The line between captor and captive had just become irrevocably blurred. In the quiet days that followed, a strange and unspoken truce settled over the penthouse. Dante was confined to the apartment while his wound healed, a caged lion prowling his territory. The raw violence of that night had been replaced by a quiet stillness. While Sophia still tended to his formal needs, Sloane found herself performing small, unasked-for acts of care, replacing the water carafe by his desk, bringing him a book from the shelf when she saw him growing restless. He accepted these gestures with a gruff, silent nod, a language of gratitude she was beginning to learn. One afternoon, driven by the familiar boredom of her confinement, Sloane found herself wandering into a part of the penthouse she hadn't yet explored. Tucked away behind Dante's office was a library. Unlike the cold, modern aesthetic of the rest of the home, this room was warm and personal. The walls were lined with dark mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound books. Old maps of Sicily hung on the walls. In the center of the room, shrouded under a gray dust cover, stood the unmistakable shape of a grand piano. Curiosity overpowering her caution, she approached it and lifted a corner of the sheet. It was a beautiful, vintage Steinway, its polished black surface dulled with a fine layer of dust. Propped on the music stand was a single, yellowed sheet of music, a Chopin nocturne she vaguely recognized. An old, forgotten ache stirred in Sloane's chest. She had taken piano lessons for years as a child, a passion her family could no longer afford after her father's gambling spiraled. Hesitantly, she sat on the bench, the leather cool beneath her. Her fingers, stiff and unsure, hovered over the ivory keys. She began to play. The notes were clumsy at first, stumbling over each other, but the melody was still there, buried deep in her muscle memory. It was a melancholy, beautiful tune that filled the oppressive silence of the penthouse. It was a piece of her own lost childhood, a forgotten melody from a simpler life. She was so lost in the music that she didn't hear Dante enter the room. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame for support, his expression uncharacteristically soft and distant. He wasn't looking at her, but through her, at a memory. "My brother Marco used to play that piece," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual hard edge. Sloane's fingers stilled on the keys. She turned to look at him, surprised by the revelation. She had unearthed a ghost. He walked slowly into the room, his presence filling the space. He stopped beside the piano, looking down at her hands. "You missed a note," he said, his tone observational, not critical. Before she could react, he reached down, his large, scarred hand covering hers on the keyboard. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he guided her fingers to the correct chord. A jolt, electric and warm, shot up her arm. For a breathtaking second, they were not captor and captive. They were just two people, connected by a shared, sad melody. His thumb brushed against hers, a fleeting, unintentional caress. He held the chord for a moment, the note hanging in the air, thick with unspoken history. The melody was not just hers, it was his too, a memory of a life before he was the Wraith, a life that included a brother who played Chopin. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment was gone. Dante straightened up, his hand dropping from hers, the mask of cool indifference sliding back into place. "The piano is out of tune," he said gruffly, turning to leave. But the spell, once cast, could not be entirely broken. Sloane was left sitting at the piano, the warmth of his touch still tingling on her skin. The forgotten melody had unearthed more than just a ghost. It had revealed a deep well of sorrow in the man who held her prisoner. For the first time, she wasn't just afraid of him. She was beginning to understand him, and that, she knew, was far more dangerous. The hours after Dante left were a special kind of hell. Alone in the silent penthouse, Sloane was a wreck of pure anxiety. Every distant siren, every rumble of thunder from the approaching storm, sounded like a gunshot. The gilded cage had never felt more like a cage, a place where she was forced to wait helplessly while a war brewed in her name. She paced, unable to sit still, her mind racing with horrific images of what could be happening to her mother. Just after 2 a.m., a local news alert buzzed on the tablet she'd been obsessively refreshing. A suspicious fire had broken out at a known O'Connell-run social club in South Boston. The report was vague, mentioning extensive damage, but, miraculously, no serious injuries. Around the same time, another brief report noted that 2 men had been admitted to Boston General Hospital with identical, severe leg injuries, attributed to a supposed bar fight. Sloane knew instantly. It was Dante's message. It wasn't a chaotic brawl. It was a surgical strike, precise, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. He returned an hour later. The storm had broken outside, and he seemed to carry the cold rain and electricity of the night in with him. He was soaked, his black overcoat dripping onto the marble floor, but he moved with the contained, lethal calm of a predator who had just made a successful kill. He found her waiting in the living area, the tablet clutched in her hands. She held it up, the news article glowing in the dim light. "Was this you?" He didn't bother to deny it, shrugging off his coat. "The men watching your mother will not be walking for a very long time," he stated, his voice flat. "And Liam O'Connell now understands that for everything he takes from me, I will take 3 from him. That is the message." "By breaking people? By setting fires?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and a strange, guilty relief. Dante stopped and turned to face her fully. His eyes were dark and intense. "They came after your family, Sloane. They marked you as prey. In my world, there is no room for measured responses. There is no warning shot. You hunt or you are hunted. I will not be hunted." The raw, brutal honesty of his words hung between them, the simple, terrifying law of his jungle. Before she could respond, his secure phone buzzed with a sharp, insistent tone. He answered it, listening intently, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "When?" he growled into the phone. "Is anyone hurt?" Sloane's heart seized. She watched as every ounce of color drained from his face, replaced by a rage so profound it seemed to make the air crackle. He hung up without another word. "What is it?" she whispered, dreading the answer. "The O'Connells," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They sent their reply. He looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a darkness she had never seen before. "They didn't hit my warehouses. They didn't come after my men." He paused, and the weight of his next words crushed her. "They set fire to the Blue Note." The name of the jazz bar, her last connection to her old life, struck Sloane like a physical blow. Her friends, Chloe, the old regulars, the life that she had worked so hard to maintain, it was all now a target. The guilt was a tidal wave, overwhelming and suffocating. This was her fault. Her mistake on that rainy night had put a target on the backs of everyone she ever cared about. She stumbled back, a choked sob escaping her lips as her legs gave out, and she sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. She was the poison. She was the reason this was all happening. Dante stood frozen for a moment, watching her break. His fury at the O'Connells was now intertwined with a new, fiercely personal protectiveness. They hadn't just defied him, they had hurt her. Moving with a resolve she didn't expect, he crossed the room. He didn't offer empty words or platitudes. He simply sat on the coffee table in front of her, his presence a solid, unmoving shield. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. The touch was firm, grounding, a silent promise in the heart of the chaos. In that moment, the lines blurred completely. They were no longer predator and prey, captor and captive. They were 2 people at the center of a firestorm, and the hunter had just become her sole protector. Dante's hand was a firm, grounding weight on Sloane's shoulder as her world splintered around her. The initial wave of guilt and horror receded, replaced by a frantic, desperate need for information. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. "My friends," she gasped, her voice cracking. "Chloe. She bartends on Tuesdays. Was she working? Was anyone inside?" Seeing her raw terror, Dante moved. The cold, calculating capo and the burgeoning protector merged into one. He pulled out his phone, dialed Luca, and put it on speaker for her to hear. His voice was a whip crack of authority. "The Blue Note. I need a full report. Now." The response came a minute later after a series of rapid-fire questions from Dante. "The fire was set after closing, boss," Luca reported. "A back door was forced. They used an accelerant to make a statement, but the fire department got it under control fast. The place is a mess, but the building is stable. Most importantly, it was empty. Everyone had gone home for the night. The girl, Chloe, is safe at her apartment." A shuddering wave of relief so potent it made her dizzy washed over Sloane. Chloe was safe. Her friends were safe. But the violation, the fact that Dante's enemies had reached into her world and set it on fire, left her feeling exposed and toxic. Dante watched her, saw the war of relief and guilt on her face. The penthouse, once a fortress, now felt like a pressure cooker. He made a decision. "Get your coat," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "What? Where are we going?" she asked, confused. "They want you to be afraid. They expect me to hide you away like a secret," he said, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "We are going to show them that we are not afraid." It was a reckless, arrogant power play, and it was exactly the kind of move the Wraith would make. Minutes later, they were descending in the elevator, flanked by guards. They swept through the private garage and into the rain-slicked streets of Boston in the back of Dante's armored sedan. It was the first time Sloane had been outside in weeks, but there was no sense of freedom. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, every shadow seeming to hold a threat. Dante didn't take her to the bar. Instead, the car glided to a stop on a quiet, elevated street overlooking her old neighborhood. From their vantage point, they could see the distant, flashing lights of an emergency vehicle near the Blue Note. Closer, the vibrant, pulsating sign of a neighboring restaurant, Gino's, painted the inside of the car in shifting washes of electric red and blue. In the claustrophobic intimacy of the back seat, surrounded by the silent city, Sloane's composure finally shattered. The neon light flickered across the unshed tears in her eyes. "This is all because of me," she whispered. The words choked with self-loathing. "That fire, the men you hurt, all of it. I brought this into your world." Dante turned to face her, his expression intense. "You have it backward," he said, his voice a low, rough growl. "I brought this into yours. This is my world, my war. You were just living your life. I was the one who pulled you into the line of fire." For the first time, he looked not just angry or protective, but profoundly regretful. He saw the beautiful, vibrant spirit he'd admired in her sketches being crushed under the weight of his sins. "They will not touch another thing you care about, Sloane," he vowed, his voice raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I will burn their entire world to the ground before I let them lay a hand on anyone connected to you." The fierce, brutal protectiveness in his promise was overwhelming. It was terrifying and, in a way she couldn't explain, the most comforting thing she had ever heard. Staring at him, his face a landscape of shadows and sharp angles in the flashing neon, she saw it all: the monster, the protector, the lonely man. The space between them, charged with weeks of tension, fear, and a strange, burgeoning tenderness, finally collapsed. It wasn't clear who moved first. It was a mutual surrender. His hand came up to cup her jaw, and he leaned in, crashing his lips against hers. The kiss was not soft or gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision, a raw expression of everything they couldn't say. It was a kiss of shared desperation, of protective fury, of finding a single, solid anchor in the middle of a raging storm. It was a claiming. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the sound of the rain and the hum of the neon sign filling the sudden silence. A line had been crossed. In the chaotic, flashing lights of the city, everything had changed. The drive back to the penthouse was steeped in a thick, charged silence. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the neon lights of Boston blurred into watercolor streaks against the windows. Neither Dante nor Sloane spoke, but the air in the car crackled with the aftermath of their kiss. A boundary had been incinerated, and both were left staring at the ashes, unsure of what came next. The captor-captive dynamic had vanished, replaced by a terrifying and exhilarating uncertainty. Back in the apartment, the unspoken tension was a physical presence. Dante walked her to the door of her room, a formality that now seemed absurd. "The guest room is still yours," he said, his voice quiet. "The choice is yours." It was the first real choice he had ever given her, a subtle acknowledgement that the rules had changed. Sloane gave a small nod, unable to meet his eyes, and retreated into her room, her mind a whirlwind of chaos and the ghost of his kiss on her lips. Sleep was impossible. The events of the night replayed in her mind, the news of the fire, the fear for her mother, the raw protectiveness in Dante's vow, and the desperate, claiming kiss. She was no longer just a pawn in his game. She had, in that single moment, become a player, and she realized with dawning certainty that she couldn't fight for a future with him if she didn't understand his past. The ghost that haunted the penthouse, his brother Marco, felt more present than ever. Understanding what happened to Marco, she felt, was the key to understanding the man Dante had become. Driven by this new resolve, she left her room in the deep quiet of the night and found herself drawn, as if by a magnet, back to the one room that felt truly personal, the library. The piano stood silently, a monument to a forgotten melody and a lost brother. This time, she wasn't just exploring. She was searching for a connection, for a piece of the puzzle. She ran her fingers over the spines of old Italian novels and books on naval strategy. Tucked at the back of a shelf, she found a heavy, leather-bound book of Sicilian poetry. It felt different from the others. As she pulled it out, something slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. It was a photograph, old and tattered, its corners softened from years of handling. Sloane picked it up. It showed two young men, perhaps in their early 20s, laughing on the deck of a boat. The sun was bright, and the Boston harbor glittered behind them. One was unmistakably a younger Dante, his smile open and unguarded in a way she'd never seen. The other, handsome and with a confident charm, had to be Marco. They looked happy, carefree, invincible. But it was the third person in the photo that made the air leave her lungs in a painful rush. Standing just behind the brothers, holding a beer and beaming with a wide, familiar grin, was a man she knew better than anyone. It was her father. Her world tilted on its axis. It made no sense. Her father, Patrick Kelly, was a small-time bookie from South Boston, a man who disappeared under the weight of his debts to the O'Connells. What was he doing on a private boat, laughing and drinking with the heirs to the most powerful Italian crime family in the city? Every story she knew, every truth she had built her life upon, fractured in that instant. His gambling problem, his disappearance, the crushing debt, was it all a lie? Or was it somehow connected to this impossible picture, a link between her family and Dante's that she could never have imagined? She was still staring at the photograph, her hands trembling, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Dante standing in the doorway, his face pale. He had come looking for her. His eyes dropped to the tattered photograph in her hand, and his expression froze, the fragile intimacy of the night before evaporating like smoke. A wall of ice slammed down, and the wraith was back, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and the agony of an old, deep wound. "Where?" he asked, his voice dangerously low and stripped of all warmth. "Did you find that?" The question hung between them, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Dante's gaze was locked on the tattered photograph, and the man who had kissed Sloane with such desperate passion just hours before was gone, replaced by the suspicious, glacial crime lord she'd first met. "It was in this book," Sloane answered, her voice trembling as she gestured to the old volume of poetry on the floor. I wasn't snooping. It just fell out." She held the photo out to him, her hand shaking. "Dante, please, you have to tell me what this means. This is my father. What was he doing with you and your brother?" Dante snatched the photograph from her, his movements sharp and angry. He stared down at the image, at the 3 smiling faces from a lifetime ago, and a wave of raw, unguarded pain washed over his features before being suppressed by his iron control. "Your father," he began, his voice a low, bitter rasp, "was not the man you think he was." He turned away from her, pacing the room like a caged animal. Patrick Kelly wasn't just some low-life bookie in South Boston. He was a brilliant accountant. For a few years, he worked for my father, handling the books for our legitimate businesses. He paused, turning back to face her, his eyes hard as flint. And he was very good at navigating the gray areas. Sloane felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Her father, an accountant for the Moretti crime family? The idea was so preposterous, so far from the narrative of the down-on-his-luck gambler she'd clung to, that she couldn't process it. "My brother, Marco," Dante continued, his voice laced with an old, familiar agony. "He trusted people. Too easily. He saw the good in everyone. He liked your father, brought him into our inner circle. He thought of him as a friend." He gestured dismissively at the photo he was still crushing in his fist. "That's what this is. A memory of a foolish, misplaced trust." "What happened?" Sloane whispered, dreading the answer. Dante's eyes became impossibly cold. "What happened is that your father repaid my brother's friendship with betrayal. The night Marco was ambushed and killed by the O'Connells, your father disappeared. But not before a great deal of money went missing from a holding account he managed. Not before key details of my brother's schedule were leaked." He took a menacing step closer to her, the accusation clear in his voice. "He didn't just run, Sloane. He was the architect. Your father helped the O'Connells murder my brother." The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. "No," she gasped, shaking her head in vehement denial. "No, you're wrong. My father. He had his faults. He was weak, but he wasn't a killer. He would never." "You know nothing," Dante snarled, the sound ripping from his chest, raw and full of a decade of pain. "You know nothing of that night, or the man he really was." The fragile, beautiful thing that had been building between them shattered. The kiss, the promises, the shared moments of vulnerability, all of it was poisoned by these shards of the past. He saw her now not as Sloane, but as the daughter of the man he believed had destroyed his family. And she saw him as the man who was slandering the memory of her father, the only parent she had truly loved. The chasm that opened between them in that moment felt wider and more impossible to cross than any guarded wall or city street. He was the boy whose brother was murdered. She was the daughter of the accused murderer. Without another word, Dante turned and stormed out of the library, the tattered photograph still clenched in his hand. He didn't lock himself in his office. He left the penthouse entirely, the chime of the elevator, a final, damning note of silence. Sloane was left alone in the room, surrounded by the ghosts of their shared, toxic history. The romance, the protection, it all felt like a lie. The greatest threat to them wasn't a rival gang. It was the truth, or the lie, that had been buried for 10 long years. The penthouse, which had evolved from a prison to a sanctuary and then to something resembling a home, now felt like a tomb. Sloane was adrift in a sea of grief and confusion. Dante's accusation echoed in the silence, a cruel indictment of her father and a death knell for the fragile bond they had forged. She wanted to hate him, to rage at him for his blind conviction, but all she felt was a hollow, aching emptiness. She was curled up on the sofa, the city lights a meaningless blur through her tear-filled eyes, when a soft sound startled her. It was Sophia, the stern, silent housekeeper. She was standing a few feet away, her usual impassive expression replaced by one of profound pity. She was holding a tray with a cup of tea. "You should drink this," Sophia said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I don't want anything," Sloane murmured. Sophia did not leave. She placed the tray down and looked directly at Sloane, her dark eyes holding the weight of a long-held burden. "He is wrong," she said, the words quiet but clear. "Dante is a smart man, but grief has been a poison in his heart for 10 years. He sees only the story he was told." Sloane looked up, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you talking about?" "Your father," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Patrick Kelly did not betray Marco Moretti. He died trying to save him." Sloane sat bolt upright, staring at the old woman. "What?" "No," Dante said. "He disappeared." "He had to," Sophia interrupted, "because he was the only one who saw the truth. And then, the hidden story, buried for a decade, finally came to light." Sophia explained that Sloane's father, with his keen eye for numbers, had discovered a massive hole in the Moretti finances. Someone high up in the organization was secretly embezzling millions and, worse, was selling strategic information to the O'Connells. "Your father was an honest man," Sophia insisted. "He went to the only person he trusted completely. Marco, not the old Don, who was too set in his ways, but the heir. Marco was going to handle it, to expose the traitor without starting a war within the family." Sophia's face grew grim. The ambush. It was not an O'Connell attack. It was a trap, set by the traitor. He leaked false information to the O'Connells to make them show up, to make them the perfect scapegoats. But the men who pulled the triggers, the men who killed Marco, they worked for him. The real traitor. The enemy within. "Your father was with Marco that night," Sophia continued, her voice heavy with sorrow. "He saw everything. He was the last loose end. The traitor tried to kill him too, but he escaped. He knew he was a marked man. The Morettis, led by a grief-stricken Dante, would think he was the betrayer. The real traitor would hunt him to silence him. His only choice was to disappear, to leave you and your mother behind to keep you safe." "Who?" Sloane breathed, the question hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Who is the traitor?" Sophia's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and loathing. "A man who has stood by Dante's side for 10 years. A man who has fed his hatred, who has whispered poison in his ear to cover his own sins. His father's most trusted advisor. His consigliere. Silvio. The calm, grandfatherly man Sloane had seen in pictures. The man Dante trusted with his life. The revelation was staggering. Relief that her father was innocent warred with the horror of the deception. And a deep, profound ache bloomed in her chest for Dante, a man who had been manipulated by his brother's true killer for a decade. "Before he left," Sophia said, reaching into the pocket of her apron, "your father gave me something. He told me to keep it safe, to only give it to you if you were ever in trouble, or if the time came for the truth." She pressed a small, old-fashioned skeleton key into Sloane's palm. "It opens a safe deposit box at a small bank in the North End," Sophia explained. "He said everything was in there, the proof." Sloane closed her fist around the cold metal. The key felt impossibly heavy. It was the truth. It was the past. It was proof of her father's innocence and the key to Dante's future. In that moment, she was no longer a captive or a victim. She was the keeper of a hidden truth, and the only one who could save the man she loved from the enemy he called a friend. Sloane sat in the darkened living room, the key, a cold, heavy secret in her palm. Sophia's words had rewritten her entire world. The anger she'd felt towards Dante had dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching sympathy. He was a victim, trapped in a carefully constructed prison of lies, his grief sharpened into a weapon and aimed at the wrong enemy for 10 years. And the man holding the key to his prison was Silvio, his most trusted friend. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't just tell him. An accusation against Silvio, without irrefutable proof, would sound like a desperate lie from a traitor's daughter. She would be dismissed, and Silvio, alerted, would become more dangerous than ever. She had to get to that safe deposit box first, but how? She was still his prisoner. Dante returned hours later, long after midnight. He moved without a sound, a true wraith in his own home. He didn't turn on the lights, as if preferring the shadows. He finally saw her, a silhouette against the glittering backdrop of the city. He looked utterly broken. The cold fury was gone, leaving behind only a hollow, bone-deep exhaustion. He walked over to the windows, standing near her but not looking at her. The silence stretched, thick with the ghosts of their fathers and a murdered brother. "For 10 years," he said, his voice low and ragged, speaking to the glass, "my hatred for your father, for the O'Connells. It's all I had left of Marco. It was a monument I built for him. It's what got me out of bed every morning. It's what made me strong enough to lead this family." He finally turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes. This was his confession. "I don't know how to lead without it," he admitted, the words sounding like they were torn from his soul. "And now, when I look at you, when I'm with you, none of it makes sense anymore. My head tells me what happened, what your father did, but my gut," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I don't know what to believe." This was it, the crack in his armor. He wasn't apologizing, but he was admitting his doubt, his conflict. This was her chance. The key felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, but she held back. He wasn't ready for the truth, not yet. He needed to be led to it, not bludgeoned by it. So, she offered a different kind of confession. She took a step closer to him, her heart aching for the tormented man before her. "I don't have all the answers about that night, Dante," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I can't tell you what to believe about my father, but I can tell you what I believe about you." She reached out, her fingers gently touching his arm. "I believe in the man who saw my ridiculous, angry drawings and understood them. I believe in the man whose brother played Chopin, the man who gave his word he would protect my mother, and then burned a piece of the city down to keep it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That man is not ruled by blind hate. I don't believe he is." Her confession of faith seemed to undo something within him. With a shuddering breath, he closed the remaining space between them, not for a kiss, but for something far more intimate. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. His large frame trembled slightly. It was a silent, desperate plea for solace, an admission of a burden too heavy to carry alone. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him, offering what little comfort she could. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people finding a fragile anchor in each other amidst the wreckage of their pasts. The chasm between them was still there, but in the shared darkness, they had built a bridge of faith. Eventually, the emotional exhaustion claimed him. He fell into a restless sleep on the sofa, and Sloane watched over him, gently brushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. The man she was falling in love with was a victim, and he didn't even know it. She clutched the key in her pocket, her resolve hardening into steel. Her mission was clear. She had to get to that bank. She had to find the proof that would set him free, and she had to do it without alerting the snake coiled at the very heart of his home. The morning after their confession in the darkness, a fragile, somber peace settled in the penthouse. Dante was quieter, his gaze often resting on Sloane with a new, unreadable intensity. The violent certainty that had defined him was gone, replaced by a troubled introspection. For Sloane, the world had sharpened into crystalline focus. She was no longer a passive prisoner. She was a woman with a mission, and the gilded cage had become a launch pad. While Dante was sequestered in his office, lost in thought, Sloane began her work. She observed the routines of the guards, the quiet efficiency of Sophia's movements, the rhythmic chime of the elevator. She was searching for a weakness, a seam in the fortress's defenses. She knew she couldn't do it alone. Later that morning, she found Sophia in the kitchen and laid the old skeleton key on the cool granite countertop between them. "I need to get to that bank," Sloane said, her voice low and firm. "I need your help to get out." Sophia looked from the key to Sloane's determined face. A long, heavy silence passed. Helping Sloane was a direct betrayal of Dante's explicit orders, an act that could cost Sophia her position, and perhaps her life. But her loyalty was to the memory of the Moretti family as it was, not the twisted version Silvio had created. "I never trusted him," Sophia said, finally, her voice laced with a decade of quiet suspicion. "Silvio, always whispering in the old Don's ear, then Dante's. He has the poison of a snake. Marco saw it. That is why he is dead." She nodded once, a commitment made. "There is a window, between 2 and 2:30. The main guard on this floor takes his lunch. A supply delivery is made to the kitchens via the service elevator. Security's focus is on the loading bay. It is our only chance." The plan was simple, and that's what made it so terrifying. Sophia would fake a small electrical fire in the kitchen, a contained incident that would create smoke and draw the attention of the remaining guard. In the confusion, Sloane, dressed in a nondescript coat and hat provided by Sophia, would slip down the service elevator. Meanwhile, in his office, Dante was wrestling with his own demons. Sloane's unwavering faith in him, contrasted with his own brutal accusation against her father, had created a dissonance he could no longer ignore. Driven by a new, gnawing doubt, he did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He unlocked a safe hidden behind a panel in the wall and pulled out a thick, dust-covered file, the complete internal case file on Marco's murder. He spread the crime scene photos, the witness statements, and the financial reports across his desk. The pain was still a physical thing, a tightening in his chest, but for the first time, he looked at it all with cold, analytical eyes, not the eyes of a grieving brother. He saw the timeline, meticulously laid out by Silvio, that painted Patrick Kelly as the linchpin of the betrayal. He saw the Dr. O'Connell communications. It was all so perfect, too perfect. Then he found it. A small, seemingly insignificant detail. A preliminary financial audit, done in the hours after the murder, showed the money had been transferred out of the holding account 2 minutes after the official time of Marco's death. At the time, Silvio had dismissed it as a clerical error in a chaotic situation, but now, it seemed impossible. Why would Patrick Kelly, having set up his payday, wait until after the murder was done and the chaos had begun to move the money? It was illogical. He called Silvio. "I'm reviewing the old files on Marco," he said, keeping his voice casual. "I'm looking at the financial report. That transfer from Kelly, the timestamp is off." Silvio's voice on the other end was as smooth and reassuring as ever. "Ah, yes, I recall that. A messy business. The chaos of the moment, Dante. Computer clocks not synced. We confirmed it was him. It is old history. A ghost. We should let it rest." The answer was perfect. And that's what bothered Dante. It was too smooth, too quick to dismiss the question, to label it a ghost. For the first time in 10 years, a genuine crack appeared in the foundation of Dante's absolute trust in his mentor. Something was wrong. At that exact moment, 2 floors above, a smoke alarm began to shriek. Sloane, her heart hammering against her ribs, pulled on her hat and slipped out of the apartment into the hallway. Down the corridor, she could see a guard running towards the smoke billowing from the kitchen. The path to the service elevator was clear. The chapter ends on this split screen of suspense. Sloane, taking her first steps toward a dangerous freedom, while Dante sits in his office, staring at a 10-year-old file, a single, poisonous doubt about his most trusted advisor beginning to take root in his mind. The freedom was terrifying. Every step Sloane took on the rain-slicked Boston pavement was fraught with paranoia. Every person who glanced her way was a potential threat, a Moretti guard sent to retrieve her, an O'Connell thug waiting to snatch her, or worse, one of Silvio's men sent to silence her permanently. The city she had called home her entire life now felt like a hunting ground, and she was the prey. After a nerve-wracking taxi ride, she arrived in the North End, Boston's historic Italian neighborhood. The small private bank was exactly as Sophia had described it, old, discreet, and intimidating. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she presented the key and her ID, signing her father's name on a ledger with a hand she prayed was steady. After a moment of intense scrutiny that felt like a lifetime, the clerk nodded and led her to a small, private viewing room. The safe deposit box was heavy. Inside, nestled in yellowing velvet, was not a simple letter, but an arsenal of truth. There was a small, leather-bound ledger filled with columns of dates and numbers in her father's meticulous handwriting, a coded record of Silvio's decade of embezzlement. Beneath it was a small, encrypted hard drive. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope addressed in her father's familiar script. For my Aisling, her Irish name, a name only he ever used. Resisting the urge to tear it open, she packed everything into her bag. This was the proof. This was her father's legacy and Dante's salvation. She felt a surge of triumphant hope as she walked out of the viewing room. It was short-lived. 2 men blocked her path in the quiet marble hallway. They were broad-shouldered, with the hard, watchful eyes she recognized from the street corner near her old bar. O'Connell's. Well, the first one said with a cold smile. "Look what we have here. Dante Moretti's little bird, flying far from her cage." Sloane's blood ran cold. She was trapped, but as they herded her towards a back exit, a third man stepped out of the shadows. He was younger than the others, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the confident swagger of someone in charge. This was Finn O'Connell, Liam O'Connell's notoriously clever nephew. "Leave her," Finn said, dismissing his men. He looked Sloane up and down, his gaze lingering on the bag she clutched to her chest. "I've been wondering what would be so important that Patrick Kelly's girl would risk coming back to the old neighborhood. He always had a box at this bank." Sloane was out of time and out of options. She couldn't get back to Dante's penthouse even if she could evade the O'Connells. Silvio would surely be alerted to her absence by now. In a split-second decision, she decided on the most desperate gamble of her life. She would not run. She would attack with the truth. "This isn't about what you think it is," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Your war with the Morettis. You've been fighting a ghost. You've been played." Finn raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Is that so? 10 years ago, Marco Moretti wasn't killed by your family," Sloane said, taking a step forward. "He was killed by a traitor in his own house. A man who framed my father for it, and used the murder to ignite a war that would keep both sides distracted while he lined his own pockets. He's still there, standing right beside Dante Moretti." She saw a flicker of something in Finn's eyes, not belief, but a shrewd, calculating interest. A decade of war, of lost men and lost profits, all based on a lie? It was a compelling thought. "And I suppose what's in that bag is your proof?" he asked, a cynical smirk on his face. "It is," Sloane confirmed. "And I need to get it to Dante. But I can't get past the man who's been guarding him for 10 years. The real traitor." She locked eyes with him, making her offer. Help me get in front of Dante Moretti, and only him. If I'm telling the truth, You get to sit back and watch your greatest enemy crumble from the inside out. And if I'm lying, she gave a humorless smile. Then you have Dante Moretti's biggest weakness right where you want her. It was an irresistible proposition for a man like Finn, a no-lose scenario. He studied her for a long, tense moment, the gears turning in his mind. He saw no deception in her eyes, only a fiery, desperate conviction. This was a bigger game than street corners and hijacked shipments. This was a chance to end the war. He gave a slow, predatory smile. "All right, Kelly," he said. "You've got a deal. Let's go see the devil and find out if you're telling the truth." Sloane had just placed her life, and Dante's future, into the hands of her sworn enemy. She had forged the most unlikely of alliances. Being a willing passenger in a car full of O'Connell men was a surreal, nerve-shredding experience. Sloane sat in the back of Finn's sedan, clutching the bag with her father's legacy inside, every muscle tense. The uneasy alliance was holding, but it was a threadbare thing. "So, you're telling me," Finn said from the passenger seat, his sharp eyes watching her in the rearview mirror, "that for 10 years, Silvio the Wise has been playing my family and the Morettis like fiddles, all while skimming from the top?" "He started a war to cover his tracks," Sloane confirmed, her voice steady. "He needed you to be a credible threat, a monster Dante would never question was behind his brother's murder. And your family has paid the price for his lie ever since." Finn was silent for a long time, the car speeding through the Boston suburbs. An unwilling, grudging respect was forming. This girl had guts, and if she was right, she had just handed him the key to dismantling his greatest enemy without firing another shot. "A direct approach is suicide," he finally said. "All business now. Silvio has Dante's ear and controls his entire security detail. We'll never get you near him, so we'll have to move the king off the board." The plan they devised was a masterpiece of misdirection, a deadly chess move. Finn's O'Connell crew would launch a brazen, public, and very loud attack on the Moretti family's primary shipping depot at the port, the crown jewel of their legitimate operations. The attack would be so significant that it would demand the personal attention of both Dante and his consigliere. It was a huge sacrifice, a costly piece to trade, but Finn was playing for checkmate. While Dante and Silvio were drawn across the city, Finn would use a disgruntled ex-Moretti guard on his payroll to get Sloane back inside the Millennium Tower. Back in the penthouse, Dante's world was tilting. He knew Sloane was gone. Sophia, playing her part perfectly, had reported with feigned panic that Sloane had somehow slipped away. The first, cold thought that struck him was that she had run, that her loyalty to her father's memory was greater than her connection to him. But it didn't feel right. The woman who had confessed her faith in him last night wouldn't just disappear. His growing unease about Silvio was now a constant, nagging thrum beneath the surface. He was reviewing the security logs from the night Marco was killed when the call came in. The port was under attack. Just as Finn predicted, Silvio was at his side instantly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "This is an unprecedented escalation, Dante. An act of war. The O'Connells have finally shown their hand. We must retaliate with overwhelming force." Dante looked at his trusted advisor, the man who had been a second father to him, and saw him for the first time through a lens of suspicion. He saw the gleam in Silvio's eye, an eagerness for war that felt performative. "Ready the cars," Dante commanded, his voice cold. "We're going to the port." As Dante's armed convoy sped towards the chaos, Finn's plan swung into motion. Sloane, her face hidden by a scarf, was hustled through a service corridor in the tower's garage and into a secure elevator. She was taken not to the penthouse, but to a vacant, dusty apartment 2 floors below it that Finn's contact had opened. The tension was suffocating. She was back in the enemy's fortress, a ghost moving through its walls. Finn handed her a burner phone. "You've got 1 shot, Kelly. Make it count." Sloane's mind raced. She couldn't call his primary number. Silvio would see it. But she remembered a detail from her weeks of captivity. A framed photo on Dante's desk of him and Marco, and scrawled on the back was a phone number with the note, "For emergencies only," a direct line he had kept for his brother, a number she was betting Silvio didn't know existed. With trembling fingers, she typed a text message. It was short, cryptic, and everything depended on it. "The ghost in the photo isn't my father. It's the man beside you. Penthouse. Come alone, I have proof." In the back of his speeding sedan, surrounded by the wail of sirens, Dante felt a vibration from a phone he rarely used. He pulled it from his inside jacket pocket. He read the message once, then twice. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Sloane's disappearance, the inconsistencies in the file, Silvio's over-the-top push for war, the attack on the port, a perfect distraction to pull him away from his home. It was all a chess game, and he had been the pawn. He looked across the seat at Silvio, who was outlining a brutal strategy of retaliation against the O'Connells. He looked at the face of the man he had loved and trusted his entire life, and for the first time, he saw the snake. "Turn the car around," Dante commanded his driver, his voice like ice. "We're going back to the tower." Silvio looked at him, confused. "But Dante, the port." The port is a distraction, Dante said, his gaze locking with Silvio's. The real war is at home. The ride back to the Millennium Tower was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The air inside the sedan was thick enough to choke on. Silvio, sensing the shift in power, desperately tried to play his familiar tune, the song of the wise, loyal advisor. Dante, this is a grave mistake, a sign of weakness. The O'Connells will see this retreat as a victory. We must project strength. His voice was laced with its usual convincing passion, but for the first time, Dante could hear the faint, discordant notes of desperation beneath it. The traitor's song was beginning to sound off-key. Dante remained silent until the car reached the tower's perimeter. Then, he turned to Silvio, his face an unreadable mask of stone. You are right, Silvio. My place is here, securing my home. But the port cannot be abandoned. He paused, his gaze pinning the older man. You are my most trusted counsel. Take half the men, go to the port and command our response. I entrust this to you. It was a test. A loyal man would refuse to leave his Don's side at such a moment. A guilty man, a man who believed his deception was still intact, would seize the chance to take command and be conveniently far away from his boss's sudden, erratic behavior. A flicker of relief crossed Silvio's eyes, so quick that a week ago Dante would have missed it. As you wish, Dante. I will handle it. I will not fail you. Silvio exited the vehicle, barking orders at the men now under his command. As his car sped off towards the port, Dante watched him go, a cold certainty settling in his soul. The snake had just eagerly taken the bait. Dante immediately got on the intercom to Luca, his true second-in-command who was driving a follow car. Forget the port. Do not break visual on Silvio. Report his every move. Dante's private elevator took him straight up, not to the penthouse, but to the 47th floor. He stepped out into the hallway, his gun drawn, a silent predator in his own territory. He found Sloane in the empty apartment, a ghost in the dark, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, determined light. The moment their eyes met, the world fell away. There was no time for apologies or explanations. Show me, he commanded, his voice raw. On a dusty kitchen counter, Sloane laid out her father's legacy, the coded ledger, the encrypted hard drive, and last, the sealed letter. Dante's hands were steady as he examined the ledger. With Sloane's explanation of the simple substitution cipher her father had taught her as a child, the numbers transformed into a damning chronicle of a decade of betrayal. Then, he read the letter. He read of Patrick Kelly's admiration for Marco's honor. He read of his terror upon uncovering Silvio's treachery, and his desperate plan to warn the young heir. He read a father's heartbreaking apology for disappearing, a choice made to protect the daughter he loved more than his own life. The letter was not just proof, it was a confession, an absolution, and a testament. As Dante looked up from the letter, his face carved with a grief so profound it was terrifying, his private phone vibrated. It was Luca. Boss, you were right. Luca's voice was tense, urgent. Silvio's convoy never went south to the port. They're circling the block. He knows. He's coming back. And he's coming heavy. Silvio had played his song for 10 years, a melody of lies that had orchestrated a war. Now, his ruse was exposed. He wasn't retreating. He was coming back to silence the audience forever. The Millennium Tower was no longer a fortress. It was a hunting ground. Dante looked from the evidence of Silvio's betrayal to the woman who had risked everything to bring it to him. The cold, calculated rage of a betrayed son and a wronged brother settled over him. He's not getting to you, Dante vowed, his voice deadly calm as he chambered a round into his pistol. The song is over. There was no time for shock, no time for grief. The moment Luca's warning came through, Dante Moretti transformed. The tormented man was gone, replaced by a cold, ruthlessly efficient general preparing for a siege. His home was about to become a war zone. Luca, hold the lobby. Nobody gets past the ground floor without my direct authorization, he commanded into his phone, his voice like ice. He's coming from the top. He'll use the private access codes. He turned to Sloane, his eyes blazing with a protective fire. Stay in this apartment. Barricade the door. Do not open it for anyone. No, Sloane said, her voice shaking but resolute. She held up the bag containing her father's proof. He's coming for this. For me. I've been a pawn in this game for long enough. I'm not going to hide while you die for me. Tell me how to help. Dante stared at her, and in that moment of defiance, he saw not a liability but an ally. A fierce, unexpected queen on his side of the board. The penthouse, he said, making a split-second decision. This apartment is a trap. The penthouse is a fortress. We go now. They made a silent, tense dash to the private elevator, ascending to the top floor just as the sounds of shouting erupted from the stairwell below. They were barely inside, the heavy steel door of the penthouse sliding shut behind them, when the first impacts struck it like a battering ram. Silvio's men had arrived. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. The penthouse, once Sloane's gilded cage, became their battleground. While Dante, armed and in constant communication with his few loyal guards, prepared to defend the main entrance. Sloane's mind, sharpened by weeks of observation, went to work. "The balcony," she called out, remembering the large glass doors. "They're reinforced, but it's a weak point." She also pointed to a service panel near the kitchen. "That controls the lighting and sprinkler systems for the whole floor. Can we use it?" Dante gave her a look of grim approval. While he focused on the brutal physical defense of their position, Sloane became his strategist. Using the penthouse's integrated smart home tablet, she plunged the hallway outside into absolute darkness, creating confusion for Silvio's men. The breach, when it came, was violent. An explosive charge blew the main door off its hinges, and 2 of Silvio's men stormed in. Dante moved with the lethal grace that had earned him his name. He was a wraith, using the shadows of his own home to his advantage. The fight was brutal, close-quarters combat amidst the ruins of his perfect, minimalist furniture. Through the smoke and chaos, Silvio finally appeared in the doorway, his grandfatherly mask gone, replaced by a face twisted with rage and ambition. He had a gun, and it was aimed squarely at Sloane. "It's over, Dante," Silvio snarled. "The girl has filled your head with lies. Give her to me, and we can end this. We can blame it all on the O'Connells, just like we should have done from the start." "The lies are over, Silvio," Dante growled back, his own weapon trained on his former mentor. "I made you," Silvio screamed, his composure finally shattering. "Marco was weak. His obsession with honor would have been the death of this family. I gave him a noble death. I built you into a leader on a foundation of vengeance. I gave you a purpose." It was the final, arrogant note of the traitor's song, and Sloane was the one who silenced it. While the 2 men were locked in a standoff, she crept to the smart home panel. With a tap of her finger, she activated the emergency fire suppression system. A deafening alarm blared, and the sprinklers erupted, drenching the room in a blinding, chaotic downpour. In that split second of distraction, Dante moved. He lunged at Silvio, not with his gun, but with his bare hands. The fight was not between Adon and his advisor. It was between a surrogate son and a treacherous father figure. It was a storm of grief, betrayal, and a decade of misdirected rage. It ended with Dante standing over a gasping, defeated Silvio, the gun knocked harmlessly aside. The penthouse was a wreck. Water poured from the ceiling, mixing with the debris of the fight. The alarms were still screaming. Dante's loyal men, led by Luca, stormed in to secure Silvio and his surviving thugs. Through the haze and the noise, Dante's eyes found Sloane's. He was bruised, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. She was safe. The battle for the tower was over. The war for his family's soul had been won. The aftermath of the battle was a surreal landscape of quiet, efficient chaos. The penthouse, a place of sterile beauty, was now a ruin of shattered glass, overturned furniture, and water-soaked marble. Dante's loyal men, led by Luca, moved with a grim purpose, securing the defeated traitors and beginning the process of erasing the evidence of the war that had been fought. A medic tended to the wounded, but Dante waved him off, his focus entirely on Sloane. He led her through the wreckage to the one place that was untouched, the wide balcony overlooking the city. The rain had stopped, and the air was washed clean and cold. In the east, the black sky was just beginning to soften to a bruised purple, the first hint of the coming dawn. Below them, the lights of Boston glittered, oblivious to the life and death struggle that had just taken place high above them. The noise and chaos of the cleanup inside faded away, leaving them in a bubble of profound silence. "Let me see," Sloane said softly, reaching out to gently turn his face towards the light. The cut on his forehead was deep, still oozing blood. Without a word, she retrieved the first aid kit, and for the second time she found herself tending to his wounds. But this time was different. There was no fear, no uncertainty. Her touch was steady and sure, a silent communication of care and shared survival. As she cleaned the wound, Dante's hand came up to cover hers, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I am so sorry, Sloane," he said, his voice a low, rough sound full of a decade of misplaced guilt. "For what I believed, for what I said about your father. In my blindness, I dishonored the memory of a good man, and I hurt you. We were both living in the shadow of a lie," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "Now we're not." She reached into the bag she had protected through the entire ordeal and pulled out the last piece of her father's legacy, the sealed envelope. "He wrote this for me," she said. I think we should read it together." As the sky lightened from purple to a soft, pearly gray, Sloane read her father's final words aloud. It was a letter of love and profound regret, a full confession of his work for the Morettis, his discovery of Silvio's betrayal, and his agonizing decision to run to protect his family. He wrote of his pride in the strong, resilient woman he knew she would become. Tears streamed down Sloane's face as she read, and Dante listened, his expression somber, finally giving her father the respect and honor he was due. When she finished, a fragile peace settled between them. The ghosts had been laid to rest. "What happens now?" she asked, looking out at the waking city. "Now," The truth comes out, Dante said, his voice filled with a new, calm authority. I will meet with Liam O'Connell. I will show him this proof. The war that Silvio started dies with him. I will purge my family of his poison, and we will rebuild it on a foundation of honor, the way my brother would have wanted. He then turned to her, his expression serious. And you, Sloane, you are free. The dead is a ghost. Your father's name is cleared. I will give you anything you want. A new name, a new life, anywhere in the world you want to go. A clean slate, away from all of this madness. You deserve that. He was offering her the very thing she had been fighting for since the beginning, an escape. He was offering to let her go, the ultimate selfless act. Sloane looked at the man before her, no longer her captor, but her partner. She looked at the city that had been her prison and now lay at her feet. She thought of her old life, a life of running and fear, and realized it held nothing for her anymore. Her definition of freedom had changed. My old life is gone, she said, a soft, certain smile touching her lips. That's not my home anymore. She took a step closer, placing her hand on his chest, over the scar that lay beneath his suit. You are. My home is with you, Dante. He stared at her, a wave of profound, overwhelming emotion washing over his face. He had been prepared to lose her, and instead, she had chosen him. As the first rays of the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting the city in a warm golden light, Dante leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation or claiming, but one of deep, soulful promise, a quiet welcome to the first day of their new life, a dawn after the gunshots. 1 year later, the penthouse was no longer a sterile fortress in the sky. It was a home. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows, illuminating the vibrant colors of a large abstract painting that now dominated the main wall, one of Sloane's. Vases of fresh flowers sat on tables, and the bookshelves in the library were now interspersed with art history books alongside the Sicilian poetry. The gilded cage had been transformed by a touch of sunshine. Sloane stood on the balcony, a sketchbook in hand, not drawing the city, but the man who had become her world. Dante stood a few feet away, on the phone. He was still the formidable head of the Moretti family, but the hard, cold edges that once defined him had been softened by a quiet, confident peace. The year since the showdown had been one of seismic change. True to his word, Dante had met with Liam O'Connell. In a meeting that would become an underworld legend, he laid out the evidence of Silvio's decade-long deception. The war did not end with a bang, but with a quiet, mutual understanding. A truce was drawn, and the bloody feud that had defined a generation of Boston's underworld was finally over. Dante, with the fiercely loyal Luca at his side, had methodically and ruthlessly purged his organization of Silvio's poison, and was now slowly, carefully, steering the Moretti empire towards greater legitimacy, a legacy his brother Marco would have been proud of. Sloane's world had been rebuilt from the ashes. Her mother, now in remission, was living comfortably in a quiet suburban home, and her brother Liam's surgery had been a complete success. The Kelly family was finally safe. With Dante's backing, Sloane had opened a small, exclusive art gallery in the Back Bay, a space that was entirely her own, a testament to her independence and talent. Good news? She asked as Dante ended his call and walked over to her. The best, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. They looked out at the familiar skyline together. The city council approved the final permits for the new port terminal. It's completely legitimate. The first brick in our new foundation. Marco would be proud, she said softly. He would, Dante agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He turned her around to face him, his dark eyes serious. None of this would have been possible without you, Sloane. You didn't just give me the truth. You gave me back my brother. You gave me back myself. He reached into his pocket, but he didn't pull out a velvet box. Instead, he presented a single, beautifully crafted key on a simple silver chain. It was an exact replica of the skeleton key her father had left for her. I know you already have a key to this place, he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble. But this one is different. This is not the key to a cage or a sanctuary. This is the key to our life. It's not a contract or an obligation. It's a promise. He gently placed the necklace around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. It is my pact with you, a pact for our future, that wherever this life takes us, whatever shadows we have to navigate, we do it together, as partners, as equals. Sloane's eyes filled with happy tears. This was more perfect than any ring, more meaningful than any traditional proposal. It was a testament to their unique, turbulent journey. I love you, Dante Moretti, she whispered, her hand closing over the key. And I love you, Sloane Kelly, he replied, his voice full of a depth of emotion she now knew was reserved only for her. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, loving kiss filled with the certainty of a shared future. It was a kiss that held the memory of danger, the echo of defiance, the comfort of healing, and the bright, unbreakable promise of tomorrow. Standing on the balcony high above the city, they were not a crime lord and his captive. They were a man and a woman who had walked through the darkest of fires and found in each other a love that was stronger than any shadow.